Hello, Holiness. We're back in class looking at the transition of America and what happened and how that happened, where you have inherited a moment for your ministry where really the culture that we live in is not very conducive to holiness anymore. It didn't start out that way. We were looking at the Reform pastor that had a really strong interaction with the youth directors of his particular organization or denomination, and his kind of candid refusal to ever go back to their event. And he starts doing this research, and he starts talking about how the history of America in swimsuit is the square by square inch story of how skin went public in modern times. Now, that is the context of your ministry. I wish it was different, but this is where the Lord has called you to minister. You're going to have to deal with this new reality. He says it's the drama of how flesh, fabric, technology, and media were engaged the Christian view of modesty in a relentless tug of war down by the seaside. And I think I was pretty strong last time saying that that's where you really do have to win the war. And again, it was the tension between those new ideas, and they were new. Now remind yourself, you just, if you can't do it, just circle it in your notes. It's new. And I hate that you're the generation that has to deal with it, but the new ideas ran into what was woven into the fabric of our society before, which actually created America, which was the biblically influenced view of society and culture, which was modesty. So let's get into looking at the first swimsuits in America. When you start looking at that, the funny looking swimsuits, many years ago, the first ones was an attempt to continue the time-honored Christian ideal of covering the body. Now that's what the first ones were. They were not trying to push the envelope too much, but they were just saying what would be swim attire that we could use as Americans. And you ready? Then there was some streamlining that's going to come, and then there's going to be some deletions. And you're going to see where it got less and less and less. And this was by design, by the people who were engaged in the process. So let's look at the first a couple of things. There's two questions that have to be answered. First of all, why was skin not public in America until modern times? Why was it not the normal? I mean, I know you go to Walmart now and you're like, holy cow, Lord help me, Jesus. And so when the skin was not public, going around bare in public was not the norm. And the answer is simple. Our culture, American culture particularly, because that's where God has called many of you primarily to minister, but they sprang from a biblical, now catch that, so underlining your notes, a biblical worldview that included not exposing, but covering the body. And so secondly, you need to ask what change in our society put skin on display. Because if it was not the norm, then how did it become the norm? And the evidence is very clear, if I should ask you on an exam, a hint, that Christian morality and its attending modesty was part of the Christian culture, which had previously served as a resistance to public nudity, simply caved in to the growing public pressure. And I promise you, in every denomination that lost holiness, that we've already talked about, that's exactly what happened. They caved into pressure. And so one man said it this way: the voice of God's word was slowly but surely drowned out by the voice of increasingly secular media. And that's the reality of what was going on. And again, that was not an apostolic. That was Jeff Pollard and what he said. Now, here it is. You ready? There's the big exposure. There is the first Christian bathing suit in America. There's the first bathing suits that we have in America. I know some of you ladies are thinking, man, I can wear something similar to that. Maybe not the same style, but similar to that outside right now. And of course, that was the point. You ready? Or you ready like this one? Look at that. Here she is. She's reclining on the beach. There's the lady at the beach. That ain't what you find on the beach today in America, right? And you ready? Or here are some other ladies that are enjoying a day at the beach. All right, now remember, man, if this is what people were doing at the beach, well, I don't think any thinking Christian would have a problem, because that's what they used to wear down at the beach. Now, here's what you need to understand. First of all, remind yourself the issue is not taste. This is not about style. And, style's changing and you're just stuck in some Amish country. No, no, no. That's not the issue. The issue was not taste. The metamorphosis of the bathing suit in America, forced our society to reassess its values around modesty. Now, that's really what happened. So what was the resulting shift? You ready? The shift was away from the biblical view of covering the body, modesty, being clothed, to an exhibitionist view of showing off the body. And that shows the real heart of the issue that we've been talking about in holiness. So let's look at the timeline of the evolution of America's public undressing. And many people have observed this. I'm sure many of you have seen the little thing that the lady put together on bathing suits in America. And they do the same thing. But this is a good way of understanding. In the 1910s, women's arms were exposed in the first decade. That means they used to be clothed. Now we got women's arms being exposed. All right, in the 1920s, the legs and the backs are progressively bared. Things become shorter, and they begin to climb higher and droop further in the back. All right, you ready? And you had to wait all the way to 1930 before you could even get cleavage exposed in a bathing suit. Now, we're not talking about an average dress. We're talking about in a bathing suit. And then it was later, in the 30s and 40s, there was this radical technological advance in modern swimwear. And that included fabrics, kind of the clinging type fabrics and the wet, dry fabrics that we think of today. Not just wet resistance, but the things that tend to cling. All right, and that technological tour de force allowed things to cling and become tight, and then the body beneath was exposed. And the first two-piece bathing suit in America appeared in 1935, which is fascinating. And on the pages of fashion magazines, and all it did was bear a few inches of flesh between the two parts. Not even the navel. They covered that up, and not too high, just a couple inches right across the top here. And some people back in 1935 wore them, but they really didn't even become fashionable until the 1940s. Why? Because even with pushing the envelope, even then they're like, ooh, that's really pushing the envelope too far. And it was just 2 inches right here. So in the 1940s and 50s, the two-piece suits bared the midriff. Finally, they got the whole middle section became exposed. And then it was, even though popular things came along, like the mallot, which was designed with holes. Now that happens where there's holes to reveal the midriff and the sides. There's a hole over here. The mallet focused on the hips, and it became tighter, and the designers could declare that you're covered except it's tight. All right, and then it creased, it inched even lower the bosom, crept higher on the leg. Most of the newest suits went strapless, and they bared the shoulders, and skin-tight waistlines and bosoms filled the shoreline like a high tide, one man said. So the navel was finally exposed. They didn't even show the navel on the beaches until the 1960s and 70s. Now, I know that's hard for you to think of, but that's really what happened. And then in the 1970s, the latter part, the high cut starts revealing the hips, like we just said. And then it wasn't until the 1980s and the 1990s that you get the radical expressions like thongs and the revealing of the upper areas and the back sides. Now, who are the contributors? Who are the people that push this timeline of exposure? Well, first of all, like one of the first guys, his name was Fred Cole. And he was in Hollywood. He was a failed Hollywood actor. He didn't make it in Hollywood, and his parents ran a business of making like the long underwear, like the ones you think of, like go all the way down to the ankle and all the way down to the wrists. Think those things with little things in the back so you could take care of business. All right, so they made those type of long handle underwear. Well, Fred Cole failed as a actor, so he decided, I'm going to renovate my family's business into making a swimsuits, and I'm going to make them more revealing. And so he said, swimsuits is not so much a garment to swim in. Now notice his language, but something to look beautiful in. And it was again about voyeurism. And so he dreamed, he says, of spectacular women with the velvety eyes and shapely limbs of the silent screen actresses. So remember, like silent films. He envisioned dramatically cut bathing suits that transformed the body into a living theater of the id. Now that term comes from Freud. And the id is what we would call the sinful nature, the side of you that wants to sin. And he says, I'm trying to put it in Christian terms, make bathing suits that will serve sin and serve a woman's desire to be looked at and a man's desire to look. Driven by this, he designed his first swimsuit with the deeply scooped front and armholes, low slung waist, and a diminutive skirt. Now notice, even here, there's going to be a skirt with it, above short trunks. But again, he knows he's moving from the biblical idea of modesty because he's getting the skirt above the knees. Now, isn't that interesting? The biblical standard of modesty is being clearly flouted in this. So what was the result? He says, a dizzying vision of sexuality. That's what he created. Now brace yourself because I'm going to show you a picture of it. You ready? This is what he said his dizzying vision of sexuality was. There it is. Now I know that you ladies wouldn't wear this because it's immodest. But that's the type of thing that he created to push the envelope, and that's not what they're doing on the beaches today. Now, this is straight out of a newspaper. If you can see the caption down at the bottom, it says, Bill Norton, the bathing beach policeman. They had a policeman on the American shore, and what is he doing? He's measuring distance between the knee and the bathing suit of a woman in Washington, D.C. in 1922. Why? Because if it's not long enough, he's kicking her off the beach for indecent exposure. Now think about that. People would die to think somebody would, feminism has won the day. They would die to think somebody would dare have the audacity to do that today. But again, that's where we've lost the war in the culture. We shouldn't lose it in the church. Let me give you another one. Her name was Margaret Felige. She was called the Crazy Hungarian, and she created two things, the scandal suit and the swoon suit. The scandal and the swoon suit. And so what she did is she created fabrics that would hug the body's curves the way she visualized them. And what she did, this is straight out of a secular book of history on the development of the bathing suit. It says her genius lay in finding that unexpected approach to the body that made it at once disturbing and seductive. Now catch that. Disturbing and seductive. Whatever the device, there was always an element of shock in her bathing suits. Now that's what she designed her bathing suits to produce. And so it goes on, we can go on to say, there it is, there's the scandal suit. The legs would go right in here somewhere. And you ready? Here's the swoon suit. And again, the legs would start at these little short. And again, now you have to imagine, there's the arms, you get the picture. Here's the shoulders bare, and here's the legs that come out. Now, that doesn't seem like a big deal in our culture today, but the reality is this is the pushing of the envelope, and this was the norm even then. Let's look at the next one. Carol Schroeder. Now, what's fascinating about her is she dedicated her life. Now, catch this. This is a secular book commenting on her contribution. She dedicated her life to persuading other women to take off as many clothes in public as possible. That was the design. That was her intention. This is the spirit of the age. This is clearly an enemy of modesty that doesn't even know she's being used by the devil, but she's being used by the devil to move women into voyeurism and to exploit men and what they look at. Okay? So in 1931, she designed the forerunner of the two-piece bathing suit. Now catch this, the book says her own showroom models were so horrified by the unprecedented exposure of the bare midriff, they refused to put it on. She couldn't even get models to put it on in her day, which is fascinating. As one historian notes, even today, when the body has become a marketable package, Making a public appearance in a bathing suit can be a disquieting experience. They did it so much that they wrote a song in American folk music called the Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny Yellow Polka Dot Bikini that she wore for the first time. The whole song is about some girl trying to get out there, and she's really nervous and she's scared because she's wearing an itsy bitsy, and I guess it was an itsy bitsy teeny weeny yellow polka dot bikini. And you ready to? She advertised it this way: the world's smallest bathing suit now on sale. And then Reard's come out with a smaller version. You ready? And they advertise it's just 30 inches of fabric. How cutting edge was that? And there was 50,000 people wrote fan letters, and catch this, it was mostly from men. Now I'm just going to say this, it's men that drive this desire in our culture. And what we want and affirm is what they sell to. And if men have holy hands, 1 Timothy 2, and they're submitted to God, then later in 1 Timothy 2, she won't have a problem of modesty of dress. The issue is his desire and her need to be affirmed. Right? And that's what makes the world go around. All right, let's look at the next one. There it is. There's the swimsuit that she made. And then after that came the true bikini. And Louis Reard came up with that bikini as we know it. And this is what he said. He advertised it very scandalously. So he said, a bikini is not a bikini unless it can be pulled through a wedding ring. What a terrible, terrible man to reduce women to objects to be devoured. Now that's why our culture was moved away from holiness. It happened on the beaches. Now notice this, in July the 5th, 1946, there was some of them so skimpy that, you ready, that these bikinis that he made in July 5th, 1946, it says, while consumers were certainly curious, this is straight out of the book again, history book, about the scandalously small amount of fabric that comprised the bikini, initial sales of the swimsuit were what? Slow. Now catch that. And that's when it was released in 1946. And many Americans were shocked by its scantiness, and the bikini was even outlawed as a form of public attire in many U.S. cities in 1946, which is shocking to think about. It would be nearly 20 years later, in the 60s, at the dawning of the sexual and moral revolution, where America really embraced sin, in the late 1960s, before American women truly embraced the bikini. And even though you could get it in France, it didn't come here till then. But after that, the author of the history book says there would be no turning back. Now, what's fascinating is when he created the model, it was so skimpy, he couldn't find one model, even in France, that would wear it. So you know what Micheline Bernardini did? He hired prostitutes to wear it and model it. Now, that is one of the most telling things that we can think about. I remember he was not an apostolic minister, but there was one particular man in his own denomination lamenting the fact that they're leaving holiness, and he was talking about these things, women that would wear these types of things on beaches, and women that would go down the hair dressed in or down the street in certain forms of attire. He said, we used to describe prostitutes. We knew what kind of woman she was. He said, now I've described the average pastor's wife. Now I know that's strong language, but that was from a guy who was not even apostolic, that was trying to get his denomination back on track. I'm going to tell you, when people say there's no turning back, I'm going to tell you God can give us a revolution, and we're going to look at that, and that's just a lie from the devil. And all due respect to the secular historian writing about the bikini, what's happening in Brazil, South America is shocking, and we'll talk about that in just a little while. He said, American women and men began a love affair with the bikini that has lasted to this day. Now, I would correct that. I don't think the author got that right. I think you could say that more accurately. They didn't have a love affair. They had a lust affair. Because it reduces women to objects again to be exploited, and she will only attract men of low character who seek to use her. And that's what we've done to American girls. We've exposed them to objectification, and we have reduced our young men to people without character who can only relate to women one way. And that's the moment that you've inherited, I hate to tell you. All right, so since this is the case, since this is the moment that we're living in as Americans and what you're fighting in terms of holiness, to quote Schaeffer again, Francis Schaeffer, how should we then now live? So number one, given the modern swimsuit, now catch this, were designed to promote public nakedness, and they were, admittedly, from their own lips and from secular resources, and remain the most revealing form of clothing. Why do so many Christians wear them in mixed company and encourage their young people to do so? And again, this is Jeff Pollard's question to the Reformed church. Now, if he can say that to the Reformed church, why in the world can't you say that as an apostolic? I remember my wife was with a group of people one time. They're wonderful people. But they went on vacation, and my wife was there, and they were having a day at the beach, and my wife walked out in proper, modest attire to go swimming, and they walked out in other things. And my wife was thunderstruck because these, in every other aspect of their life, were tremendously wonderful Christian people. They just had this little bit of gap in their understanding. And she said, well, what are you wearing? And they said, well, we're on vacation. And she said, well, I hope the Lord doesn't come while you're on vacation. And to their credit, these wonderful people never did that again. I'm going to tell you, that was a great moment of influence for a young lady to take a risk with people she loved. And you're going to have to take risks in ministry, because we got to, like I've heard students say, well, I grew up in California. I just grew up going to the beach. That's not an excuse for sin. God's not reduced to the culture of the beach or California or, pick your area of Florida. He's not reduced to that. Holiness doesn't take a vacation just because we do. If it's right, it's right. And we got to stand where the Scripture stands. Now, the second thing is why do ministers and leaders expose God's young men and women, he says, to the disquieting experience of greater body exposure in the name of evangelizing them? I remember a group of young ministers that were unfortunately in very influential positions in our organization. They wanted to go to New Orleans to have youth congress around Mardi Gras. That's stupid. Why would we take a bunch of young people and expose them to topless, terrible partying? There's some places you just don't take your young people. How much eye candy is okay for them? How much clothes are you going to peel off, young ladies, to create some fun event for them? How much does a young man have to see? And you got to decide where you're going to land as a minister and as a parent to say, what do I allow them to go to? And one thing you can do is say, I understand that's what you're going to do. My kids are not coming. I love you, but we're not going. And if you're going to have that at the camp meeting, or you're going to have that at the conference, or you're going to have that at that event, I love you, but I'm just going to tell you, I'm not bringing my kids. You ready? And if you're a preacher, my saints are not coming. We'd love to come and give our time and fellowship, but I cannot expose my people to those things. Now, if you don't want to do that, I understand, but you go ahead and give leadership to somebody else who has the courage. And I pray you don't have kids, because you're going to have to lead at some point. And I know you want to. That's a little rhetorical. All right, number 3, he says, should preachers of the gospel of Jesus Christ be involved in promoting sexual display? No, you got to preach modesty. Of course not. For which our young people would have been arrested 60 years ago. He said, should you be allowing them to wear something that just 60 years ago on a beach would got them arrested? And again, this is not an apostolic. This is Jeff Pollard. He's a pastor in the Reformed Church. Now, all I'm saying is if he can get away with saying it, come on, good apostolic, you know better. We can preach on holiness. We can apply the biblical standards of nakedness and have the courage to help young people do the right thing. Okay, so now what is the result then of what we've inherited in America? It's what I'm going to call if you'll pardon the candid expression, the result is a public peek at the bedroom. Now, what do you mean by that, Brother Kilman? Well, it means that if you walked into a young lady's bedroom and she happened to be in a certain stage of undress and she was in her what we used to call unmentionables, now everything's mentionable, She would scream, dive for cover, run in the closet, throw something at you, smack your face. Something would happen, right? But if it's waterproof, it's okay. No, that's not the case. That's just the way the world is pressing the envelope. Okay, so one man says it this way. For over 100 years, this single garment, the bathing suit, has served as the most important vehicle for the public undressing of America. So here's my question for you wonderful students. What are you doing to swim in? Is it modest? Now, if it's not, you have to know that's been the number one way the devil has driven a wedge into American culture and moved it away from holiness. I remember a young man graduated from IBC and went back, and his pastor asked him to work with his young adult leaders, and there was just some issues in that church, and the young adult leaders were struggling, and there was just a bad group, and they were going to a place to swim and be on a boat, and he was like, and they were saying, well, at least wear this, at least wear shorts, at least wear shirts, and of course the IBC student was just horrified, and he went and talked to the pastor and said, hey, did you, and it was good. Now, you shouldn't blast that all over social media or do something dumb, but take a problem to leadership. And that wonderful pastor, who was in a fight for the heart of that congregation, did the right thing. He shut down the event. And the people that were working with the young adults, they said, well, we just don't want them to show up in bikinis. That's what we were trying to avoid. And he said, well, that's good, but that's not the biblical standard. And I'm telling you, the respect I have for that pastor who is in a good fight. He's saying, I understand that you're trying to, but we ain't going to make any accommodation. We're going to teach them the biblical standard, and they can do whatever they want on their own. But we are not going to have an event by our church that endorses anything less than the biblical position. Why? Because we need to make sure that we know that wedge is being used by the enemy. So a woman in a so-called modest swimsuit piece today would have been arrested in the 1910s and the 1920s, as all the newspaper archives reveal. So again, that's just a shocking thing to consider, that our culture has slid so much into these things. And I hate that you have this moment, but the Lord, by the way, He has entrusted it to you. So here's a newspaper article from Boston. Boston arrest doesn't a mistake, says Annette, and she's arguing she shouldn't have been Annette because she dared to show her legs on the Revere Beach at night. This woman's one-piece bathing suit got her arrested. That was in 1907. You ready? And she was arrested. Now, that's just a shocking thing to know, that used to be the history of what we face. This is the fight, is about losing the battle at the beach. Job 31:1 says, I made a covenant with mine eyes. Why should I then look upon a maid? Job's saying, I'm not going to let myself, I'm going to make a covenant that there's certain images that I am not going to see. And so this dichotomy is developed in America, where unacceptable nakedness on the city streets became the high fashion on the beach. What people would never do in public, they're willing to do on the beach. And that is terribly inconsistent. It shouldn't be in a Christian's life, and you're going to have to help them see that's where the greatest cultural change happened in American society. And I don't care if you're in California or Florida or wherever, or if you're up in Alaska where it's cold. Keep your clothes on. Rule number 6, according to Brother Brown. All right, in the 1970s, hair and skin had to be in this next cultural change. Hair and skin had to be in peak condition, and everybody's lifting weights, and you had to have almost 0% body fat, and you're ready for exposure in swimwear. And then what happens is in 1970, they start removing tops, and topless beaches start appearing all over the world. See, here's the double threat of this holiness issue. And I know I've belabored this point, but I want you to get it. There was a double threat. You ready? Swimwear in America not only legitimized, you ready, nakedness for her, but it also has its Siamese twin that always accompanies with it the sin of voyeurism for him. Now, this is where you got to remember, women are tempted to be lusted after, men are tempted to lust. And that's just both sides of lust. All right, so that's what we're dealing with. And again, Job says, I made a covenant with mine eyes. I made a promise. I'm not going to put some things in front of my eyes. Why then should I look upon a maid? And that's the man's equation. And you ready? And ladies should say, why would I dress like that? Now, this is a secular book. I'm going to quote it. It's called Splash by Martin and Coda. And you can get the information right there. They said, spectatorship is inherent to swimming. Now, notice that. You go ahead. You reduce. Now, I'm going to be strong. At some point, you're going to have to get strong. And you're going to have to say, that's right. You drag your little baby girl out to the beach and you put her in a bunch of stuff that a bunch of men are going to make a spectate. They're going to be a specter. She's going to be out there for them to visual. You shouldn't reduce your daughters to that. Or anybody else's daughter, good preacher, to that as well. And he says spectatorship is inherent to swimming. What we fail to see in the streets is palpable at the beach. Swimwear and spectatorship are indivisible in concept. She wears it to be seen, and he wants her to wear it to look at her. And there it is. Now, this is not even a preacher. This is a couple of secularists who is dealing with the reality of the human condition. All right, now, what does that mean then? What does it mean that Siamese twin, that he looked lustfully upon a maid? Forgive me there for that. So here it is, Splash, the history of magazines. So they go on to say, even clothes that conceal aim to reveal. You ready? Because people don't just walk around naked. They cover just enough to make it tantalizing for you to look. And this is Allison Laurie, author of The Language of Clothes. Look at what she says in her book. Some modern writers believe that the deliberate concealment of certain parts of the body originated not as a way of discouraging sexual interest, but as a clever device for arousing it. It's like the split up to halfway up the thigh. You know, then she begins to walk. It's kind of the now you see me, now you don't. Now you see me, now you don't. It's about exposure. I'm not talking about a split below the knees. I'm talking about a split that goes up and shows stuff that, you know, or you get the point. Or sleeves that are see-through, or tops that are sheer. And you're like, ooh, there's skin there. And it's lace everywhere else. And it's meant to say how much skin is being exposed. And by the way, that's not even good for a wedding dress. Wedding dresses have to be holy too. All you guys need to say amen. If you've ever been at a wedding, you're like, dear Lord, what am I doing here? Can't even look the bride and, well, you get the point. She says, according to this view, clothes are the physical equivalent of remarks like, I've got a secret. They are a tease, a come on. It is certainly true that parts of the human form considered sexually arousing are often covered in such a way as to exaggerate and draw attention to them. Now, it's kind of like a few years ago, they had tops, and I don't think our girls just even paid attention. Like it was one color everywhere except for like one area. And that was a different color. And it's like, you know, okay. And so you got to get thoughtful about some of those things. About well, you get the point. I was just here to go too far, lest I lose you in this. Kidwell and Steele, another couple of secularists that I've already quoted, he says, clothes are especially sexy. Now, that should never be the thought of any dress for any Christian woman. But they say, especially sexy, when they call attention to the naked body underneath. That's sheer and tight as well as unveiling. He says, this applies to, you ready? Short skirts, tight pants, tight skirts, skimpy tops, shorts, and a variety of clothing that conceals and yet reveals the body underneath. Right? So that's what we're dealing with in terms of modesty. And there it is, the two books that you can get the references from if you want more on that. The Language of Clothes and Men and Women Dressing the Part. All right, and these are, again, those are secular, so they're not even apostolic, and they're making those observations. So there's where sociology and cultural sociologists and people engaged in the culture know what's going on sometimes and name it better than even some apostolic ministers, which is unfortunate. Be strong, okay, students. Let the Lord use your ministry to bless the congregations you're sent to. Teach in a thick way, and there's wonderful admissions all over the culture that you can use. All right, now here's a good question. Why is there at times seemingly apathy, the lack of desire to address this in ministry or by ministers? I'm going to give you what, again, Jeff Pollard says. He says, first of all, some who claim to be ministers of God are simply unregenerate. They're not saved. They're not born again. And will therefore relentlessly fight to clothe fleshly pleasures in the robes of religion. And I believe that's right. There's simply some preachers that are not saved. There's some that backslide. They call it going charismatic. That's backsliding. They leave holiness. Now, I'm not saying there aren't some good people that get caught up in that and can get pulled out of that. But I am saying that the desire to promote the lust of the flesh means some people, they're just not saved. They have no issue, they have no desire for holiness because they don't have Holy Ghost on the inside. And you just have to know that. And Jeff Pollard's right. He says, some professing ministers of God do not lead. They instead are led. And that's why he calls them professing ministers. They're not a minister. You're not a minister unless you lead. They are instead led by the desires of their people. Now that is a candid remark. And again, I'm going to say it again. If you're not strong enough to guide and lead and teach in these areas, give the pulpit to somebody with the courage to lead. He says, particularly by certain women and the youth group, which is devastatingly coupled with passive carnal men. He says, when you get women that want to do it, and you get the youth group that wants to be popular and do the cutting edge stuff, and they have passive carnal husbands, then instead of leading, some ministers just cave in and follow the flock. And you're not a shepherd if you're not leading the flock. And that takes, and I think he's right. So be aware of that. Third, he says some have so many furious battles in other various areas, they simply have not reflected or studied this issue. And I think that's right. I think some of you could say, I've been studying the doctrine of essentiality and the oneness of God, and maybe I just haven't spent as much time on defending the biblical stance of holiness there is. And I think that's changing in our organization, and there are lots of ministers traveling and teaching and preaching again the importance of holiness, and I think that's helping our movement. And by the way, if you want to be a young minister in demand, be savvy on these issues, and everywhere I go, they gobble it up. And young people especially. Your young people, your generation is looking for a voice. Take your ministry seriously. I promise you, you'll be gobbled up because people are looking. Fourthly, he says, some have concluded it's just simply a matter of Christian liberty. You can do that if you want, or you can not do that if you want. But candidly, all due respect, those ministers have not studied the scripture, and they don't know that this is what God desires. So, he says, why are all of these issues at work? Now, I want you to catch this. This is an incredible insight from a denominational minister, not even somebody who's apostolic. Somebody whose organization left holiness. He was not a holiness preacher or teacher. And now he said, man, we got to go back to our roots. And he's teaching holiness again to the Reformed people. He says the reason why is they have been dumbed down by the saturation of media and the worsening standards of the culture. So when I see people that are walking away from holiness and they've fallen in love with the world, I'm going to say, how much Hollywood are you watching? If you got to look like Ken and Barbie, what have you been watching and what have you been measuring yourself against? You ready? And when I see men consumed by lust or women consumed by lust, I'm going to say how much pornography or how much terrible forms of media and shows you shouldn't be watching. I don't even care if it's PG-13 and it's overtly sexualized. How much garbage have you been watching? And that right there is the danger. And that's why people are being shaped. You have to know that that's what you're fighting in your congregation. Let me try to wrap up. I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to show you. Now, I've showed you that the world is having an impact. Now, let me show you where the church is having an impact. And I hope some of you take this just as seriously. I see it being produced at General Conference, and some of you ladies are buying your fashion online from other apostolics, and I think it's tremendous. But this is way back in 2012, in September 2012. This is the Associated Press. This is not even this is not an apostolic magazine. This is the Associated Press. It's a mainline article, and it was made of fashion dresses in Brazil, South America. Now remember, Brazil is like the home of the Brazilian bikini. Now, what does that mean? The Brazilian string bikini, which is not a thong. It looks like strapless almost. It's like nothing. It's the smallest thing in the world. It originated in Brazil, South America, and that's where you get, all those types of things. So this picture talks about Brazilian brand Kali, which promotes itself as Moda Evangelica, or the evangelical mode, or evangelical fashion. He says, are worn by mannequins behind a shop window in Sao Paulo, Brazil, found in stores of Sao Paulo, where the hot items are the demure long-sleeved frocks, long-sleeved in Brazil, where it's hot. People can wear long sleeves in the heat? Yes. Bedouins do it in the desert, and it protects you from the sun. The right types of fabrics, of course. And the how low can you go, not top, but hemlines. Drop the hemline, keep it going down. And the polyester putty colored potato sack dress. Why? Because it's loose. And it says in Brazil, the latest fashion trend, now catch this, hitting the streets of Rio de Janeiro is the polar opposite of the famous Brazilian bikini. Instead of second skin dresses, very tight, very revealing, leggings, kind of stupid dresses, and shocking pink spandex or strapless tops with strategically placed peekaboo paneling, the newest fashion craze is what? Overt modesty. Found in stores like Silka Evangelical Fashion, these coveted pieces include the demure long-sleeve frocks, like we already talked about. How low can you go hemlines? And the polyester putty colored potato sack dresses. My God, they're wearing loose, long, and it covers up. How can this happen? Modesty in Brazil. In the birthplace of the fio dental, or the dental floss string bikini, so-called evangelical fashion has emerged as a growing segment of the country's $52 billion a year textile industry, catering to the conservative sartorial needs of Brazil's burgeoning number of what? Now catch this. Born-again Pentecostals. Now, I'm just going to tell you what that means is this, that instead of being influenced by the world, you can be an influence. So take your position in the culture seriously. So over there, what happened was this. There were some families, and I mentioned it in class. Some of you ladies know how hard it is to get modest apparel. But they quit shopping, and they started making their own. And then ladies started saying, where did you get that dress? Because you ladies know what it's like. You get a nice, like, A-line dress it meets all the right standards. You go to buy it, and all the other girls in the church done bought it out before you. And you ready? Or you go and you have to buy 3 of the same black skirt because you'll never see one again for like 6 years in the fashion industry. And so they started making their own. And then they got so many orders that one family, everybody quit their business and they started making these fashion lines. And they made so much money that then other people, and then they started taking so much money away from the mainline companies in Brazil, South America, that they started saying, why are we losing so much money? And then they came up with modesty lines. Now, I'll just tell you right now that if we can have that same type of revival where salt and light happens in the culture, and all of a sudden we're creating fashion instead of succumbing to it. I think you can do that in North America, and I think we can have a revival in the culture, because if they're having revival in Brazil, if we spend our money in the right places and we embrace the biblical ideals, God can give us revival in North America here. So teach the biblical definitions, and then watch the Lord use your ministry to shape families, and then what they buy makes a difference. Oh, Brother Kilman, that'll never happen. All you have to do is say Chick-fil-A. All you have to do is say Target. And Chick-fil-A won they have the record for the number of money brought in one day, because Christians said, you're not going to press the homosexual agenda on us. We're going to show support for Chick-fil-A. And you ready? And then Target tried to force transgender people into the bathrooms where we take our kids, and they lost record revenue and corrected their decisions. I'm just going to tell you that we're way more powerful in the culture than we think, because what we buy matters. Okay? All right, take that seriously. Teach and preach and watch the Lord through the fabric of what your people obey. They'll become the salt and light in the world and impact the culture. And God can give us a revival here, even in North America. I believe it. I hope you do too. God bless.